The card on the end kennel read 6 a.m., and neither of the two women at the front desk could stop looking at it over the old man's shoulder. "He's been standing there 4 minutes," said the younger one, low, the way you'd narrate a weather system. "Just standing." Marlene already told him twice. Visiting hours for that kennel ended at 5. The other one didn't look up from her clipboard-free counter, just tracked him sideways, the way you track something you've decided isn't dangerous, but also isn't leaving. Why a dog with a spotless working record went dead silent the moment he came through Millrace's intake door 11 days ago, and why he pressed his nose into the same corner of his run every single time the room emptied out, was not a question either of them had thought to ask out loud. It was just the shape of the last week and a half. Numbers had already started doing the talking that people wouldn't. 24 hours left on the euthanasia schedule taped to his kennel card. 4 counties waiting on a board vote to decide whether every shelter in the region would run its dogs through the same scoring software that had already condemned this one. One dog, no name on the file but the one the staff had given him, because nobody could get near enough to ask what he used to be called. If you've ever watched someone everyone else had given up on finally be reached, you already know how this one ends before it starts. The old man in the doorway wore a canvas barn coat gone the color of creek mud, buttoned wrong by one hole, the kind of coat that had clearly outlived at least 2 winters. It wasn't built to survive comfortably. He didn't argue with the clerk. He didn't raise his voice or check a watch or do any of the things people do when they want to be seen as reasonable. He just stood, weight settled oddly to one side, like a fence post that had been driven crooked on purpose and had decided the ground could adjust to it instead. "Sir, I really do need you to have a seat in the lobby," the clerk said again. Gentler this time, the practiced gentleness reserved for people you've already decided are lost. "We can get someone to help you first thing in the morning." He didn't answer that either. He looked past her, down the corridor toward the run with the card on it, the way a man looks at a door he already knows the weight of before he's touched the handle. "Poor old fella," the younger volunteer murmured, not unkindly, already turning back to her screen. "Probably here, about a lost cat from 20 years ago." The other one almost laughed, then didn't, because something about the stillness of him made the joke feel like it belonged to a different room than the one they were sitting in. Behind them, past 2 sets of double doors, a shepherd mix with a spotless working history and a euthanasia slot in 18 hours, had his nose pressed into the corner of a concrete run, exactly where he pressed it every time the kennel cleared out, and nobody currently on shift had the first idea why. The old man shifted his weight, turned his whole body rather than his neck to look down the hall, the way a man does when one shoulder has quietly stopped taking orders from him years ago. Then he walked toward the front desk instead of away from it, and set a canvas duffel bag on the counter, with the particular care of someone setting down something that had already survived being dropped once and wasn't going to be given the chance again. "My name's Harmon Fenno," he said. "I'd like 5 minutes with the shepherd in the end run. Alone, if you can manage it." He did not explain who he was. He did not explain the duffel bag, which had ridden on the passenger seat of his truck the whole 41 minutes from the county road outside Corbin's Ford, or the fact that inside it, wrapped in a flour sack cloth gone soft with age, sat a harness he had built by hand in 1987 and oiled every spring since, on a schedule nobody but his wife had ever noticed, for a dog that hadn't existed yet. The coat had been Cora's father's, cut down at the sleeves. The shirt underneath it she had pressed that morning, without being asked. The collar sitting sharp against a neck, weathered the way rope gets weathered, not by one storm, but by 30 years of ordinary use. His right shoulder rode an inch lower than his left, and would not lift past a certain angle, no matter what he wanted from it, so when he reached for anything on that side, he turned his whole frame instead, a small rotation that had become so automatic he no longer registered doing it. Jules Cobbs, 24 years old and 2 years into the job, was the one who came out to deal with him, mostly because Marlene had already decided he was somebody else's problem. She took in the coat, the duffel bag, the set of his jaw, and made the same mistake the 2 women at the desk had made, filing him under harmless and confused before he'd said 6 words. "Sir, can I help you find something?" 5 minutes, Harmon said again. The shepherd in the end run. I won't need the light on. We don't really do visits after intakes flagged a dog for reassessment. He's not up for viewing right now. She glanced at the duffel bag. Do you have a dog you're looking to surrender, or? No. He set one hand flat on the counter. Not a demand, just a place to rest it. I've come to see about the one you've got. Jules had been trained, like everyone at Millrace, to read a certain kind of visitor, the ones who wanted a puppy and would settle for whatever was cutest in the lobby, the ones who wanted a project and would abandon it in 6 weeks, the ones who wanted to feel like they'd done something good on a Saturday. Harmon Fenno did not fit any of the three, and that alone should have told her something, except she was 24 and 2 years in, and had not yet learned that the ones who don't fit the categories are the ones worth watching. I can ask my supervisor, she said, but I have to tell you, that dog's had a rough 11 days. He hasn't really let anybody close. I know, Harmon said, and something in the flatness of it, the total absence of surprise, made her look at him a second longer than she meant to. He unzipped the duffel bag 2 inches, no more. Just enough that she caught a glimpse of old leather, dark with oil. A brass ring gone smooth as riverstone, from years of a thumb worrying at it. Then he zipped it back before she could ask. 7 years, he said, mostly to himself. The way a man confirms a number he's already carried so long it doesn't need saying aloud. I'll wait as long as you need me to. He didn't sit in the lobby chairs. He stood near the window instead, weight settled onto his good side, and watched the corridor doors the way a man watches a tide line he's memorized, waiting for it to do the thing it always does. Down the same corridor, past a set of double doors marked staff only, Sloane Vandergrift was in the middle of the best sentence in her presentation, the one she always saved for last because it landed clean every time. 94%, she said, tapping the number on the wall behind her, where it sat printed in a font, too confident for the room. 94%, successful long-term placement across every shelter that's adopted the assessment protocol. That's not a guess. That's 26,000 data points behind it. The man across the table from her, a board member visiting from one of the 3 counties still deciding whether to sign on, nodded along in the specific way people nod when they've already decided to be impressed. Sloane was 33, sharp-suited in a building that mostly ran on donated fleece vests, and she carried a printed run sheet clipped to a board under one arm, like other people carry a briefcase. She'd built her whole morning around this pitch, and the pitch was good. Because she was good at this, she'd spent 4 years turning a chaotic intake system into something a spreadsheet could finally hold, and the numbers she quoted were true, every one of them, which was exactly the problem nobody in that room could see yet. The system doesn't guess, she said, her favorite line, the one she reached for whenever anybody's face looked like it wanted to argue. It measures bite inhibition, resource guarding, handler response latency, recovery time after a stress event, 12 behavioral markers, scored the same way in every county. No more guesswork, no more good old boy hunches about which dog's got a look in its eye. That was the exact moment Jules knocked and put her head through the door, which Sloane would later describe, without much exaggeration, as the worst possible moment for an old man in a mud-colored coat to enter her morning. Sorry to interrupt. There's a gentleman up front asking to see the shepherd in Kennel 11, the one flagged for reassessment. Sloane's expression didn't change so much as recalibrate, the practiced smoothness of someone used to redirecting a room without losing it. That dog's not available for viewing, he's mid-protocol. She turned back to the board member with the small, apologetic smile of someone managing an interruption rather than a problem. We get walk-ins, it happens. He says his name's Harmon Fenno, Jules offered. He didn't really explain. Have someone walk him back to the lobby, Sloane said, already sliding to the next slide, the 94% still glowing behind her like something she could stand in front of forever. We'll get an intake volunteer to help him fill out an interest form. That's the process. The process, as it turned out, moved faster than Harmon could finish a sentence. By the time Jules came back out with an apologetic look and a tablet propped for the standard adoption interest form, Harmon had already given his name, his address on the county road outside Corbin's Ford, and had gotten exactly 4 words into explaining who he used to be, when the tablet screen flashed a soft red bar across the top. Address outside contracted service radius. Application flagged for manual review. That's, Jules frowned at it, tapped it twice like that might change the verdict. It's saying your address doesn't fall inside our adoption radius. We only place within 40 miles for reassessed dogs. It's part of the... She looked up. Part of the new protocol. I've driven 41 minutes, Harmon said. Not 40 miles. I know. The system's not really built to take that kind of input. It goes off the zip code. She looked genuinely sorry about it, which was more than the software managed. I can flag it for manual review, but that usually takes a few days, and I don't think... She didn't finish that sentence either, because both of them understood, without either saying it, what a few days meant, measured against a card that read 6 a.m. Harmon didn't argue the point. He didn't raise his voice, didn't ask to speak to anyone in charge, didn't do any of the things a man does when he wants to be taken for reasonable. He simply turned, that same careful rotation of the whole body rather than the shoulder, and looked back down the corridor toward Kennel 11, patient as a man, reading a river he intends to cross, regardless of what the ferry schedule says. Then I'll wait for the review, he said, and in the meantime, I'd still like my 5 minutes. It took Jules another 40 minutes of quiet negotiating, with Marlene, with the duty supervisor, with her own better judgment, before anyone agreed to let the old man sit outside the run instead of in it, under supervision, which was the compromise Sloane herself signed off on, without ever coming out to look at him, already moving on to the next county on her tour. Harmon lowered himself into a folding chair someone dragged over from the break room, the kind with a metal frame that complained under any weight, and set the duffel bag between his boots. Jules stood a few feet off, arms crossed, less out of authority than out of not knowing what else to do with them, and together they watched the shepherd in the end run press his nose into the same corner of concrete he'd pressed it into 11 days running, and hold it there, still as a photograph, while the rest of the kennel roared and barked and pleaded around him for attention he wasn't offering to anyone. For the better part of an hour, nothing happened that a stranger would call anything. Harmon didn't speak to the dog, didn't crouch by the chain link, didn't click his tongue, or say the soft nonsense words most visitors reached for automatically. He watched the way a man watches weather he intends to work in, cataloging without commentary the fixation on the corner, always the same 8 inches of wall, the way the shepherd's ribs moved shallow and fast whenever a food bowl was pushed through the slot, then refused entirely once the door clicked shut again. The flinch, small but total, every time a staff member's clipboard snapped against a metal rail 2 runs down. "He won't eat when we're watching," Jules said, mostly to fill the silence. "We've tried leaving it. Coming back later. Doesn't matter." Sloane's assessment logged it as food guarding with an audience avoidance component. That's a bad combination on the scoring matrix. "It's not guarding," Harmon said. It was the first thing he'd offered in 40 minutes, and it came out plain, without any charge in it at all. A dog that's guarding food watches the food. He's not watching the bowl. He's watching the door. Jules looked back through the chain link, really looked this time, and saw it was true. The shepherd's eyes tracked the door of the run each time it opened, not the bowl sliding in beneath it, waiting for something that wasn't coming. "And that clipboard sound," Harmon went on, nodding at the staff member 2 runs down without looking directly at her, "that's not aggression either. Man startles at a snap like that. It's not fear of the sound. It's what the sound used to mean. What does it used to mean?" Harmon didn't answer that one. He just watched the dog return, again, to the corner, press his nose into the same 8 inches of wall, and hold there like a compass needle that had found true north and would not be argued off it by anyone in the building, least of all a stranger in a folding chair. 20 minutes, Jules said, checking her phone, half to herself. He's been at that corner 20 minutes now. He'll go another 20, Harmon said. He's not stopping because he's stuck. He's stopping because it's the only order left he still knows how to follow. Jules didn't understand that sentence yet. Not really. but something about the certainty in it made her stop reaching for her radio, stop rehearsing the words she'd used to explain to Sloane why she was still out here 40 minutes past when this was supposed to have ended. At the 90-minute mark, without asking anyone's permission, Harmon Fenno set both hands on his knees, drew one long breath that seemed to cost him something in the ribs, and stood. "I'd like to go in now," he said. Jules's first instinct, trained and correct, was no. Her second, which she would not be able to explain clearly to Sloane later that night, was to unlatch the gate. The gate swung, and Harmon lowered himself down into the run, the way a man lowers himself who has done a great many things, slowly and on purpose for a great many years. Good knee first, weight shifted, the bad shoulder held close to his body, the whole way down, until he was sitting cross-legged, on cold concrete, 4 feet from a dog that had not let a human being within arm's reach in 11 days. He did not reach for the shepherd. He reached for the duffel bag instead, unzipped it fully this time, and drew out a bundle, wrapped in flour sack cloth gone soft as chamois, from age and handling. Jules, watching from the gate with her hand still on the latch, saw leather the color of strong tea, hand-stitched in a pattern she'd never seen on any harness in the shelter's supply closet, a brass ring at the center worn to a dull, perfect shine. Harmon unwrapped it, the way other men might unwrap something with a fuse. He laid it flat across his own knee, buckle side up, and began, with the unhurried precision of a man performing something he had done 10,000 times and would do exactly the same way the 10,001st, to work the straps into order. Left first, then the girth, then the chest piece, each motion its own complete sentence, no wasted movement, no motion repeated. The dog's ears, which had been pinned flat for 11 days straight, came up a half-inch. He didn't speak. He let the leather creak instead, that specific worn-in sound of stitching that had been flexed exactly this way thousands of times before, a sound with a shape to it that no clipboard snap or kennel door could counterfeit. The shepherd's nose left the corner, just barely, just enough that Jules, standing at the gate, felt something go tight and electric behind her sternum, the way you feel a held breath before you know you're holding it. Harmon set the harness down, flat, an arm's length from himself, not offered, not pushed forward, simply placed, the way you set something down for someone to come to on their own schedule and no one else's. Then he said 2 words, low, in a voice that hadn't used them in longer than Jules had been alive, and the tone of them carried something so specific, so exactly calibrated, that it didn't sound like a command at all. It sounded like a door being unlocked from a key that had been cut for this one lock alone. Find it. The shepherd's whole body went rigid for one held second, and then, for the first time in 11 days, he moved toward a human being instead of away from one. 2 runs down, a small monitoring tablet clipped to the wall, the one feeding real-time data back to Sloane's assessment dashboard, the one that measured heart rate proxy through movement pattern and vocal stress markers through a microphone bolted above the kennel door, registered a spike in activity so far outside its trained parameters that it did the only thing its programming allowed. It flagged the reading as an error and discarded it, the way a machine will always discard the one truth it wasn't built to hold. Sloane Vandergrift found the assistant frowning at that discarded reading 40 minutes later, long after her board member had left satisfied and her afternoon had emptied into paperwork, and when she pulled up the log herself, scrolling back through a spike her own system had thrown away as noise, something in her jaw set the way it did when a number refused to behave. "That's Kennel 11, the assistant said. "The Shepherd system says the sensor glitched." "Sensors don't glitch like that," Sloane said, already moving toward the corridor, run sheet still clipped under one arm, out of habit rather than need. "Pull the video." What she found, when she found it, was an old man in a mud-colored coat sitting on the concrete floor of a kennel run, with a shepherd's head resting, fully, trustingly, in his lap. One hand laid flat and still on the dog's shoulder, while the other rested on a harness, unlike anything in her supply catalog, and Jules Cobbs, standing at the gate, with her hand over her mouth, and tears she hadn't planned on running clean down both cheeks. Sloane stood in the corridor a long moment, watching through the chain link, her run sheet suddenly the least useful object she had brought into the building that day. "He's not on today's visitor list," she said finally, mostly to fill the silence with something that sounded like procedure. "No, ma'am," Jules said, without turning around. "He wasn't on the visitor list. He's the reason there's a dog worth putting on one." Sloane didn't answer that. She stood a moment longer, arms crossed, watching the shepherd's tail, stiff and unmoving for 11 days, lift once off the concrete and settle again, slow, like something rusted finally remembering how to turn. Even then, watching it with her own eyes, she wasn't ready to let the number on the wall behind her presentation be wrong. "This doesn't change protocol," she said, quieter now, less to Jules than to the dashboard glowing faintly behind her thoughts. "He still has to go through reassessment. I'll need to see this logged properly before anything changes on paper." She said it like a woman closing a door, gently, not slamming it, and did not yet understand she'd already left it open a crack she couldn't take back. Sloane didn't linger in the corridor. She walked it twice, arms crossed over the run sheet, watching through the chain link as the shepherd's breathing slowed into something almost peaceful, and each pass she found a new sentence to explain why none of it mattered on paper. "I'm not saying it isn't remarkable," she told Jules, once Harmon had finally, carefully, worked himself back up off the concrete with one hand braced on the wall and the dog pressed against his leg like something moored. "I'm saying remarkable isn't a category on the intake form. The reassessment protocol still has to run. That's not me being difficult. That's the contract." "The contract that condemned him 11 days ago," Jules said, before she could stop herself. Sloane's mouth tightened, the particular tightness of someone absorbing a fair hit without conceding the fight. "The board vote is at 9 tomorrow morning. 4 counties deciding whether to expand this system region-wide. If I let one dog skip protocol because an old man walked in with a harness, I don't have a system anymore. I have a suggestion." "And his slot's at 6, Jules said. 6 in the morning, 3 hours before your vote." The number sat between them in the corridor, ugly and exact. Sloane didn't answer it, because there wasn't an answer that didn't cost her something either way. Harmon, listening from just inside the gate, said nothing to either of them. He was looking down at the shepherd, one hand resting on the dog's shoulder without pressing, the way a man rests a hand on something he intends to keep still without holding it down. "Reassessment can't happen before 6, he said finally, not raising his voice. "Not the kind that means anything." "Then we need something else that means something," Jules said, already turning toward the staff office. "Before 6. What she meant, and didn't fully admit to herself until she was 3 drawers deep into the shelter's archived intake records an hour later, off the clock, was Anvil's original service file, the one that had come over in a banker's box from the county when the shelter took custody 11 days ago, unread by anyone because nobody had thought a shelter dog's paperwork mattered past a microchip number. She found his working history buried under a stapled stack of veterinary intake forms, a service designation, a training kennel code, a decommission date from a private contractor that had folded 4 years back, and a single name listed as original handler of record that meant nothing to her and would have meant everything to Sloane's board if any of them had thought to look. She photographed 3 pages with her phone before Marlene caught her still in the building at 8 that night and asked, not unkindly, whether she planned on getting paid overtime for this. "I need a phone number," Jules said instead of answering, "for somebody named Grady Ovington. It's on the old contractor's referral line." It took 4 tries and 2 wrong numbers pulled from a decade-old directory before she reached anything at all, and what she reached was a voicemail greeting recorded in a clipped, unhurried voice that sounded like it had given orders for most of its life. She left a message anyway, laying out as much as she understood in under a minute, which wasn't much, and then she waited. Grady Ovington did not call back for 6 hours, and the reason was as unglamorous as most true reasons are. He was 31,000 feet over 3 states, phone in airplane mode, on a connecting flight he'd booked 2 weeks earlier for reasons that had nothing to do with Mill Race Regional Animal Shelter or a dog named Anvil, and every reason to do with an old debt he hadn't finished paying yet. By 11 that night, Harmon was still in the building, Seated now on the same folding chair outside Kennel 11, anvil pressed against the chain link nearest him, rather than in the far corner, harness folded on his knee, like something he intended to use again before morning. Cora had called twice. He'd told her both times not to hold supper, which she had done anyway, because 49 years of marriage teaches a woman exactly which promises her husband intends to keep and which ones he makes only to spare her worrying. Jules brought him a cup of vending machine coffee near midnight and sat down on the floor beside the run without asking permission from anyone, her back against the cinder block, the photographed pages glowing faintly on her phone screen in her lap. "If this doesn't work," she said, "if Ovington doesn't call back before 6. "Then it doesn't work," Harmon said, evenly, and there was no defeat in it, only the plain arithmetic of a man who had learned a long time ago which outcomes he could control and which he could only prepare for. "You did more tonight than most people do in a year. That's not nothing, whatever happens at 6. Jules didn't answer that. She just watched Anvil's flank rise and fall, slow and even, for the first time in 11 days, and hoped the 6 hours of silence from a stranger's phone would break before the 6 hours left on the kennel card ran out first. At 4 in the morning, with 2 hours left on the card and the corridor lights turned down to their overnight dim, the front door chimed and a man in his late 50s came through it, wearing a jacket too thin for the hour, and the unmistakable bearing of someone who had commanded rooms for most of his working life, and hadn't fully unlearned it in retirement. "I'm looking for a dog named Anvil," Grady Ovington said, to no one in particular, "and a man named Harmon Fenno, and I only just got off a plane, so somebody's going to have to walk fast." Jules walked fast. She led him down the corridor at a near jog, past the darkened offices, past Sloane's presentation slides, still glowing faintly on a screen someone had forgotten to power down, and stopped short at Kennel 11, where Harmon sat exactly as he had for hours, one hand resting on a sleeping dog's shoulder. Grady stopped at the gate and didn't say anything for a long moment. He looked at Harmon, the way a man looks at weather he's been forecasting for years, and finally sees arrive. "Sergeant Major," Harmon said, without getting up, without much surprise in it at all, as if 6 hours of silence had simply been the ordinary shape of waiting for a man he'd trust to show eventually. "Kennel Master," Grady answered, and something in the exchange of those two words alone, spoken flat, without ceremony, did more to still the corridor than any speech either man could have made. Grady didn't explain himself right away. He set a hand on the chain link, looked at the shepherd's steady breathing, and for a moment simply stood there, absorbing it, the way a man absorbs the sight of a debt he thought he'd have longer to settle. "You know why I stopped answering my phone about anything to do with kennel program business 4 years ago," he said finally to Harmon, though Jules understood it was meant for the room as much as for him. "Contractor that had Anvil's line folded up in a hurry. Everything got auctioned or reassigned inside of a month. I pulled him personally before they could send him wherever the rest went, because his sire was a dog you trained out of the litter you ran back when I still had bars on my collar worth listening to." He looked at Harmon a long moment, and something in his face did the thing composure does when it finally has permission to stop holding a line it's held a long time, not a crack, nothing so loud as that, just a stillness settling into a face that had clearly practiced not showing much for 30 years. "I've owed you this dog's safety for 10 years, Grady said. "I just didn't expect to be the one delivering him back to you instead of the other way around." Jules, standing at the gate with the photographed service pages still open on her phone, understood before either man explained it further that the debt in that corridor had never run only one direction, and that whatever happened at 6 that morning, it had already stopped being about a scoring contract and started being about two men settling something years overdue. Sloane Vandergrift arrived at 5:10, summoned by a call from the overnight desk that used 4 words she hadn't expected to hear together at that hour. "Retired Sergeant Major, here now," and found the corridor outside Kennel 11 more crowded with quiet than she'd have thought possible for 4 in the morning. Grady Ovington stood with a folder of his own, thin and official, that he'd apparently kept in a go-bag for exactly this kind of reckoning. Jules stood with her phone photos already printed off the shelter's ancient office copier. Harmon sat where he'd sat most of the night, one hand on a dog who had, sometime past 3, finally, fully fallen asleep against him. "I was told there's new information," Sloane said, and to her credit, she said it without the practiced smoothness of her boardroom voice. She sounded tired, in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. Grady handed her the folder without preamble. "Anvil's sire trained under Kennel Master Harmon Fenno at the program I commanded for 6 years. This dog wasn't randomly assigned to a defunct contractor. He was placed there because I moved him myself, out of a closing kennel, into a line I trusted, because I knew the bloodline and I knew the training standard behind it. That's not sentiment. That's a documented transfer with my signature on it, dated 10 years back." Sloane read it standing up, the overhead light doing her no favors, and Jules watched something in her posture shift as she turned the second page. Not defeat exactly, more the specific stillness of a person recalculating a number she'd trusted completely. "My system logged a dog in total behavioral shutdown," Sloane said slowly, more to herself than to either man. "It wasn't wrong about that. He was in shutdown, complete. Every marker matched." She looked up at Harmon, and there was no argument left in her face, only the plain arithmetic of a woman confronting the edge of what her own tools could measure. What it couldn't score was a scent pattern from a training ritual that predates every test I run. There's no field in the assessment for that. There's no field for a harness. "There ought to be," Harmon said. It was the first thing he'd offered her directly all night, and it came without any edge in it at all. Sloane looked at the folder again, then at the sleeping dog, then, for a long moment, at nothing in particular. "I built a system to take the guesswork out of exactly this kind of thing," she said. "The version of me that walked in yesterday would have told you a harness isn't data." She closed the folder. "I don't think I believe that anymore." At 5:40, 3 hours before she was due to stand in front of a board and argue for expanding her software across 4 counties, Sloane Vandergrift sat down at the front desk terminal herself, pulled Anvil's file, and amended it by hand. Shutdown, resolved, handler-specific scent recognition confirmed, condemnation status rescinded, and beneath it, in a field the software had never contained until that morning, she typed a new line: "Manual override, pending field addition, authorized by Operations Director." "I'm going to propose we build that field into the system," she told Grady, though she was looking at Harmon when she said it. "A place for the thing the 12 markers can't hold. I don't know yet what to call it." "Call it what it is," Harmon said. "Room for what the numbers don't cover." He didn't ask her name cleared publicly, didn't ask for the board to hear his part in it, didn't ask for so much as a line in the shelter's newsletter. When Sloane, still working through the particular humility of being visibly wrong in front of people, asked what she could do to make this right, Harmon Fenno asked for exactly one thing. "Anvil's original service record," he said. "It never named the unit that trained him, just a code number. Fix that. Let it say who he came from." Sloane wrote it down before she'd finished nodding. It was Jules, sitting cross-legged on the floor near the gate with the exhaustion of a night with no sleep in it, who finally asked the question she'd been circling since midnight. "Why'd you keep that harness oiled for 7 years? You didn't know there'd be a dog to put it on." Harmon looked down at Anvil, still sleeping, one paw to